you're on.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, David. My name is Bruno Scott. I'm a co-founder of these events. Thanks for attending today. We really do welcome and appreciate every one of you for taking the time to come and join us and share your experience with us. This event is brought to you by Business and Technology of Greater New York, or BTGNY. And the purpose of the events is to engage business and technology leaders in Greater New York to discuss their management and technology best practices and opportunities. BTGNY is sponsored by X Matters, Brooklyn Winery, and Elementary Brewing. We'd love to take questions during the event to make it more interactive. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask our guest, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address them live immediately following the Fireside chat. So with that said, let's get started with the Fireside chat. David?
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Bruno. I appreciate it. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a shame that our sponsors can't be with us today. That includes Brooklyn Wine and Elementary Beer from Hohokus, but we'll get them hopefully in the near future. I'd like to introduce everybody today to Jorn Soke. Jorn is, we go back a ways. I think I met Jorn in a New York Public Library at a Stella Artois beer pouring event in mid-2000, I'd say 2006 or 2007. He's a great guy. He's he's with CEO of Fluent Beverages up in Toronto, but he has quite an interesting background. He hails from Belgium, which is one of my favorite countries, which is a whole other story, actually. I grew up there. He's a graduate of the Hogeschool voor Wetenschap en Kunst, which is just a fancy way of saying the College University of Arts and Sciences in Belgium. He's also a graduate of an executive program at INSEAD in Paris and has an MBA from St. John's University. But after all that school, Jorn did go to work finally. He spent 6 years at Coca-Cola in Belgium as brand manager and manager on multiple Coke brands. And since late 2005, if I'm not mistaken, Jorn, you've been at InBev, which is now, as you know, Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is the world's largest brewer with all of its iconic brands. Jorn has worked on many of them, including Stella, Beck's, Lef, Bud Light, and Bud, amongst others. And I could go on and on. As global marketing manager, global brand director, and then CMO USA, and for the company in the US and of course Canada. Most recently, Jorn was Global VP of Marketing Strategy with Anheuser-Busch InBev here in New York City. Jorn is a big picture guy, and by that I mean he's really adept at finding opportunities and new markets and areas to explore, which has led him today to his CEO of Fluent Beverages position, which for those of you who don't know, it's a cannabis CBD joint venture between ABI and its Labatt subsidiary in Canada, and also Tilray, which is a premium cannabis company out in Western Canada. Jorn is married and is an avid runner, and I guess once this pandemic lifts, he still hopes to break the 3-hour marathon run. Welcome everybody. Normally we clap amongst yourselves. But Jorn, welcome. It's great to have you here today, and thank you so much for your time. And we'll get into it. I guess the first question, and again, for all of you, don't hesitate. If you have questions that you would like to ask of Jorn after the presentation, type them in at the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom page, and we'll get to them afterwards. Arwen will read those out. I guess the first question is a natural one, Jorn, and this ties back, I think, to your big picture guy quote that I made a moment ago. Anheuser-Busch, the world's largest brewer, a behemoth, huge, dominant market share, relatively conservative. What on earth possessed them to get into this business? And what led you to moving up to Canada and opening it up?
Yeah. Well, I disagree with the fact that you think Anheuser-Busch is conservative, because I think the exact opposite, in the sense that ABI started the venture funding before anybody else actually made it popular. Procter & Gamble, Unilever, everybody has now those venture arms. ABI was doing that way before them. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here today leading this joint venture, because they were always looking at what is the next thing that we either can capitalize on, or what is the next thing that actually can kill ABI. The way I eventually ended up here is when I was the chief marketing officer both in the US and in Canada. We actually noticed that our performance on the coasts was under a lot of pressure, and obviously, as a very scientifically driven organization, we try to understand of what is driving these underperformances specifically on the West Coast. And one of the hypotheses that eventually rose to the front was there must be something around cannabis and the legalization of cannabis that has some sort of an impact on our business. It's extremely difficult to prove because, as you know, cannabis is illegal in most of the instances. It's only became legal over the past couple of years, so you don't really have any long-term trends to be able to identify what the actual impact is. So actually, I did an experiment. I gathered a bunch of marketeers from around the world, and the first night they arrived, I threw a party in a bar. We had a band, free beer, open bar. And nobody knew that I was doing an experiment. And the following day, right before dinner, I invited everybody to go to a cannabis store and buy whatever they wanted to buy. It was also important that they consumed. So I wanted them to have the experience of cannabis, and it is legal in California, so nobody was breaking the law. And then we had another party the following night, and so again, free open bar. Actually, the same band performed. And so on the third day, on the morning, I asked everybody, what do you think your consumption was on day one versus day two? And just to know, it is the exact same bar, the exact same atmosphere, the band played the same song, so it was as scientific as it could get. And the amount of consumption of alcohol the second night was considerably lower than the first night. And it started opening up the minds of people that, yes, there is something that can actually cannibalize alcohol and beer at a more rapid pace. Again, not really 100% scientific, but at least it created the anxiety. And so when the ZX arm, the venture arm of ABI, then started looking at who can we partner with around the world to really go and do this experiment at a larger scale, we ended up with Tilray. I was not even aware that ZX was actually going after this partnership. But as soon as I heard, I put my hand up and I said, I want to lead this because I think this can be transformative for the organization. It might actually be all a hoax. It might actually be something, a fluke. It can be something that is not going to be big. But what if this is a digital camera moment for Kodak, for ABI? This could be extremely fascinating. And so that's why I ended up here in Canada leading the charge with those beverages.
Was that something that went relatively smoothly? Did you run into some resistance at first on this idea, or based on the example you gave us and the research, that was enough to push it forward?
No, I think ABI and found the right partner in Tilray, and so we said, look, let's not jump into this. Let's go and learn. I think there's very little resistance at this point. We're very happy that we're in it. We're learning firsthand. We're actually building a sizable business on top of it. So first indications are that we're actually discovering what we thought we would discover.
And just for our audience benefit, if you try to go on fluentbeverages.com and you're in the United States, it will be very difficult. Lauren will tell us why, but Fluent Beverages is tell us a little bit about the product quickly too, Jorn. It's a CBD infused.
Yeah, the one that I'm drinking now is we've launched a line of CBD beverages. It's the purest form of CBD that you can find. We've developed an emulsion to keep it stable in the beverage for over half a year. But but most importantly is the onset is actually very quick. It's less than 15 minutes. So you start actually feeling something in less than 15 minutes. We're live since December of last year. We both have teas that you steep, and the one that I'm drinking is actually a carbonated beverage. It's called Every. It's in a 269 ml can. As you can see, it has a lot of legal mentionings on it because the Canadian government, despite the fact that they've legalized it, they still want to make sure that consumers don't overconsume.
Gotcha. And it's going well since you launched.
So far, so
it.
good. So far, so good. We launched it. What is it now? We've been in market now for 10 months. What is fascinating about what we're seeing is that there's a lot of skepticism around cannabis beverages. But what we're seeing now in the Canadian market is that of all the form factors, the beverages are actually outperforming the vapes, the pens, and the edibles. So the subcategory is growing share within the cannabis space. And I honestly believe that it's the most social way to consume cannabis. You don't have smoke, you don't have the smell that disturbs everybody else. And you can make it taste like whatever you want. Because one of the main reasons why consumers don't consume cannabis is because they don't like the taste. And this one, for example, is a mango passion fruit. You wouldn't even know that there's cannabis in the beverage.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, I hope we get to try some one of these days. We'll have to see how that goes.
Come on up to Canada and I'll buy you one.
Well, we can't even do that. Open up your borders. But let's get into some of the questions then, that have to do with best practices in business and technology. What are the most important decisions that you make as a leader of Fluent Beverages, of your company, your organization?
I think the easiest answer to that question is I get to pick the players on the team. It's who do you recruit and who do you let go. I think it's extremely important for leaders to realize that you're as good as your team is. And so spending an enormous amount of time in handpicking those individuals, making sure you have the right ones, you groom them, but also at the same time, if you made a mistake recruiting people, is be very open and honest with those individuals, let them go again. On top of that, once you have a strong team, I think you need to make sure that they walk or run or jog into at least the direction that you want them to go in. So setting out a strategy is, I believe, of crucial importance. Not necessarily asking the people or telling the people how to execute against the strategy, because that's the freedom and the liberty you should give them if you've built the strongest team possible. But telling them at least, we're in point A, we think we need to get to point B, tell me now how we're going to get there. And it's difficult for me to put a weighting on these, but I think the third one probably is the most important one, which is about setting the culture of the organization. I have no problem sharing my strategy with any of my competitors because I know that my team is better than theirs and they can execute it better and they are more eager to win. And so for me, is setting that set of principles, of values that you believe in as an organization as a driving force to help you decide if you are going to make that decision or another, to push you and have that confidence to make those decisions. And
speaking of values, now what do you see as the core values that you've tried to instill at the company, and what is the vision of the company at this point, and how do you communicate those internally?
Yeah, so we basically have 4 values, I'll go through them very quickly. The first one is consumer centricity, and that's an obvious one. If you're not maniacally obsessed with consumers, you shouldn't be in the CPG business. But the big thing is that a lot of companies say they are consumer centric, and then you provoke them and you ask them, so what do you do that is consumer centric? And you will be hard pressed to actually find something that actually lives on a day-to-day basis from a consumer centric perspective. I think Amazon does it very well. And I think we actually have found an interesting way as well. So first off, anybody who presents to me needs to start with, what did you learn from a consumer in the last 5 days? And that is mandatory. Otherwise, the meeting doesn't continue and the meeting doesn't happen. And we actually encourage everybody in the organization to spend at least one day a week with consumers, whether it's on a shopping trip, whether it's in a qualitative group, whether it's talking to people in a bar. But we encourage people really to go out there on a continuous basis.
Is that more challenging for you now, given the environment we're in, or you can do some of that online, or?
A little bit. There's absolutely a lot that you can do online with social listening and a little bit of reach out as well. But in Canada, cannabis is considered a mandatory business, so we can actually still go to dispensaries. We can visit them. So we actually have a lot of access to those store managers still.
I knew I loved Canada.
Yeah. The second value or principle that we have is strategy drives everything. Ties back to what a CEO needs to do in setting the strategy, and we communicate this very openly. Here's where we are. This is where we need to be, and we allow people to make decisions. And there's two types of decisions: type 1 and type 2. Type 1 decision is I, as an individual, I know exactly what the strategy is, and I know that the decision that I'm taking is the right one, and I'm not going to commit to such an amount of budget that I cannot turn back my decision. Those decisions, take them, run with them. Don't ask for approvals. And then there's a type 2 decision, which is identical to decision number 1, which basically is more difficult to revert back to the original position. For those, ask feedback from your boss. Maybe come all the way to me to ask for permission. But we encourage people to really make decisions to move the needle, as long as they understand the strategy.
But sometimes you have to pivot.
Exactly, and to be very honest, I'm a big believer that the people who are closest to the problem or the opportunity, the ones that are best placed to make the decision. A lot of the times people come to me, for example, if one of my PhDs comes to me and says, I have made an optimization to the emulsion, and it explains me what the chemistry is behind it. I don't understand it anyway. So make the decision, move, and if you want, inform me at a later stage. The third principle that we have is we are a professional sports team that wins championships. And that's very important. Obviously, I'm a big fan of engagement and friendship at the office, but what I want is that people know that they have your back like on a sports team. Everybody knows the role that they're playing. Everybody knows how to perform in that role to perfection, but we're here to win championships. And so we're extremely competitive. And the final one is
with the hiring decision too. I mean, in terms of, you know, if you look at an organization as a sports team, sometimes you got to let, you know, people go under the, not always under the most ideal circumstances. Yeah,
exactly. But also what it means that is you put a score up there for everybody to know. We publish our net revenue number all over the organization, how far we are from target, but we also rank and publish our employees. Everybody knows every time where they are in terms of appreciation. It's tough, but it's something that I think is very valuable. And then the final one is about an owner mindset, is spend your money as if it's your own on everything. Very simple principle, but it's so powerful. You turn off the lights when you leave a room. I mean, it's as simple as it gets. I've stolen a lot of these with pride from other organizations. The consumer centricity in the type 1 and type 2 decisions is basically stolen from Amazon. The strategy drives everything is bluntly stolen from Netflix. So there's a lot of inspiration around us.
Absolutely.
What is very important, and I cannot underline this enough, is you gotta personally believe in those principles as a CEO, as a management team, and making sure that people in the organization believe in those principles as well. Because otherwise, they're just a poster on a wall and nobody cares. And there's so many. I'm sure you've all visited so many companies where there's these beautiful slogans and principles against the wall. Ask anybody in the company to tell them back to you, and they won't be able to.
How many do you have in the company now, Bjorn?
So we employ direct now about 40 people, and indirect, because we work with co-manufacturers and suppliers, obviously, about 150.
Wow. And then in terms of bringing more people on board, let's say, for example, and this is my next question actually, when you're faced with two equally qualified candidates, how do you determine which one to hire or who to hire?
I would recruit both, as long as they have the principles of the organization, they believe in what the company stands for, because I truly believe that you never have enough talent in your organization. And so if, from a budget perspective, you have the freedom to recruit them, do it, and let them start generating that revenue as soon as they join the team, and they'll pay themselves eventually. What I do believe is very important is that you don't look at people from their resume, because resumes everybody has. It's more about what are recent achievements that they have done. But most importantly for me is attitude. Are you somebody that within those four principles that I just explained, are you somebody that thrives within that culture? Because otherwise, this company is going to be horrible to work for.
That makes sense, because you may have specific needs that you're trying to fill as well, and if you happen to get a candidate that may not meet all the hard skill requirements, if they fit in on all the soft skill requirements and they fully embody corporate culture, you may want to bring them in, because you can teach people things. You can't always teach culture.
To give you a couple of ideas, when I was CMO in the US, I recruited a wide variety of people. Actually, one of the best performing brand managers that I recruited was a former teacher. Had no formal training in marketing, never worked in a CPG company, never worked within a marketing team. And he became one of the best marketing people in my team, because he had empathy and he could listen to consumers much better than the classically trained marketeers.
Wow. So bringing people on board, and as you get bigger, you're going to, there's going to be more, I guess, tiers within the TIERS, not TEARS, within the company. What advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time, either at your company or just based from your experience at Coke or ABI in general?
When I became the CMO of Labatt, I made so many mistakes, and right before that, I was the head of Stella Artois globally, and small team with a lot of centralized control. I could make so many decisions, and there was not a single piece of creative that went out of my team that I did not approve. And that was a formula that worked beautifully for me. So when I went to Labatt, I thought to myself, I'm going to manage the marketing team identical like I managed the global team. And I said, I want to approve everything that goes out of the marketing team, whether it's a tweet, a Instagram post, whatever it is, I need to approve it.
A control freak.
Exactly. And obviously, and with technology, it's easy to do, because you set up a website, everything is posted there, you can click and it's approved. So it actually doesn't slow you down necessarily. But the problem that it creates is, one, people don't believe you trust their capabilities. So what you get is people who just walk into the office, do their hours and walk out again, because they don't have any vested interest in taking risk, in making decisions. And so therefore, my advice to any leader is you don't know all the answers, and don't pretend that you do. Let your team be the ones who make the decisions, and let them thrive as long as they make the decisions within the confines of the strategy, and give them the power to do so. But most importantly, I believe, is when they make a mistake, when something goes wrong, have their backs. Even if you disagree with the decision that they took, because that's the only way I believe that you're going to build a team that is willing to take risks, to move the needle, and to get to the results that you eventually need to get to.
In that kind of environment, you start to learn how to accept failure as a tactic of growth, to a point, obviously.
Exactly. And what you do, in my opinion, is if you look at succession, a lot of senior leaders, because everybody's looking up for you for decisions, don't necessarily train the people in decision taking below. And when you allow for this freedom, you actually have a wealth of people that actually can replace you. And I think that's, for me, is one of the things that that type of management style also secures, is a very clear succession plan and a very clear development path for all of your employees.
Let's talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion within the organization. And it's interesting because you're not in the United States anymore. You're in Canada. I know the environment has some similarities to us. I mean, systemic, racism and as operational bias in the workplace sometimes exists. But how do you look at diversity and inclusion today? And how, by that I mean diversity and inclusion within your own organization. If you care to elaborate a little bit on the environment that you came from at Anheuser-Busch InBev, are there any practices that you took from there and that are looking at here? But what is your vantage point, if you will, on D&I, and how does it impact Fluent Beverages?
Two things again. If you claim that you're a consumer-centric organization, diversity is mandatory because you advertise to a diverse community. So that is, if you claim to be consumer-centric, that's one thing you need to have. Secondly, when you claim that you're a professional sports team, not everybody is a defender, not everybody is an attacker, not everybody is a midfield player. So you need, again, also diversity in your team in order to build such a team. For me personally, this is something that almost comes natural. If I look at the teams that I've built throughout my career at ABI and now at Fluent, it's because I have this mindset of building a team that wins with consumers. By default, we get to an extremely diversified team. So to give you an idea, I gave a presentation to some New York-based analysts last year in December. And I actually showed my executive team in one of the slides. Not even thinking about it, just for you guys to know, I have 5 people on my executive team, 3 of which are women, and two are men. And then they still also I have 4 different nationalities amongst the 5 people. And I didn't even think about when I put up the slides, because I just wanted them to know who my executive team was. And one of the analysts, after I ended my presentation, stood up and applauded. And she said, I'm not applauding Fluent because of the business results you guys are setting or the business strategy that you guys have, but for the fact that for the first time, I see from the start diversity ingrained into the organization, which I took as an enormous compliment, but I wasn't even going for that one. But what I think is very important also with diversity and inclusion is that people forget about the inclusion piece. Because there's a lot of people who now are putting quotas and positive discrimination and all of those elements in place. I don't believe a policy can fix diversity and inclusion, but especially inclusion. When you have a diverse workforce, how do you make sure everybody's point of view is heard and respected in the final decision? And so that inclusivity piece, I think, is the one that is most often forgotten in the entire diversity debate. And I think that deserves more attention. And the way we do it at Fluent is that a meeting will never end when we have heard everybody's point of view, and we appoint sometimes people in the room to say, okay, you pay attention to who speaks and who didn't, and let's make sure that those people's opinion are heard at a later stage.
That seems to be the most obvious way, the most basic way. I'm just curious how else you could look at the issue of inclusion, but maybe that's it.
To be honest, I think it's practical. You have to do it that way. You also have to be very conscious of biases, right? Because everybody has biases when you go into a room. But I think you have to be very careful of specifically with the type of teams that I like building. If you're a professional sports team, you tend to gravitate towards alpha type of personalities. And alpha type personalities are loud and they yell and sometimes they dominate the room. And you got to make sure you balance that, because if you have a little bit more of an introvert person in the room, you got to create a safe environment for them also to speak up. And so it's very important that the chairmen of the meeting make sure that everybody is heard equally.
That's interesting. Your point earlier when you were talking about the values of the company, the first one you mentioned was consumer centricity. What you just described now really checks off the button too of people centricity. Your people, it's been argued, Richard Branson, I think first started it with his airline was, he said our most important asset is our people, and a lot of people now it's commonplace. But I think you've ticked that box with the way you've addressed, openness and inclusion and diversity within the company.
Yeah, I honestly believe I've spoken to a lot of venture capitalists in New York, and a bunch of the 3G guys as well. And the conclusion is always the same. Everybody has access to money. That's not the problem. The problem is that you need human capital. You need people you can trust to build businesses for you. And those are very far in between. And the secret sauce of the VC companies that are great versus those that are good is the people. And I think that's true also with CPG companies. I mean, you can walk into a room, assess the talent that is sitting there, and kind of know what their market share position is.
True. Let's switch. Those are great insights, and your experiences are, I think, quite unique. Let's move over into the arena of technology a little bit. Anheuser-Busch is obviously has a large footprint in technology, and they've done some very interesting things in the digital space to build the brand and the product, all the different brands and products. Looking at that background and looking at what the vast growth that you're experiencing quickly at Fluent Beverages, what is one of the biggest IT or tech challenges you have faced, and how did you handle it, or how are you handling it?
I think there is an enormous amount of information that comes towards leaders of organizations. But I think a lot of the information is redundant. People think that by knowing more, they make better decisions. I think it's much better to know that the information you're getting has an impact on the output that you want to generate. And so for me, what IT needs to do is to still have an eye on all the information that is out there, but distill it down to the bare essence of what the senior leaders, but also the leaders in the organization need to know to make better decisions. And when I look sometimes at the dashboards that exist at ABI, at other organizations, there's so many variables that are on that page where you're like, even if you move this variable by 50 percentage points up or down, the impact on your ultimate goal of net revenue is 0. So why the hell are you looking at it? Why are you confusing yourself and the organization with variables that don't matter? And so the risk with that strategy is that you become too focused on a couple of variables, but you still need a wide spectrum of information coming in. And that's where IT, I believe, needs to play that role through artificial intelligence, through social listening, through mapping, to make sure that you hear what is essential, but don't get lost by the amount of information that is coming to you. That's not easy to build. So you need IT with a business mindset that understands what are the different variables and levers that we can play with, and build the structure accordingly. Don't give me an SAP tool because it can do everything. Give me a tool that actually helps me explain my business. And most importantly, and this is one of the things that I also think IT needs to do a much better job at. IT is a lot of the times looking backwards, explaining how you got to where you are today. That's interesting, but then you should be a historian. What I need IT to do is to tell me, we predict that this is going to happen if you push these and these buttons. And it's the forward-looking strategy that IT needs to provide that I miss a lot of the times.
You were telling me last time we spoke that you're using a dashboard or a tool. Yeah. I thought it was fascinating. I was wondering if you could share that with the group.
Yeah, so we operate, if you think about a CPG company, we all tend to believe that there's a million strategies out there to be pursued. But at the end of the day, any CPG company has 3 main strategies to work from. The ultimate goal is to grow net revenue. And obviously, to the bottom line, you want to make sure you have gross profit and EBITDA growth, but it all starts with net revenue. And net revenue, you can grow from three angles. You can recruit consumers who are not consuming you today, called penetration strategy. You can convince your existing consumers to consume you more often, a frequency strategy. Or you can convince your existing consumers to buy more expensive products from you, which is a premiumization strategy. Those three is, for any CPG company out there, the three variables that you need to work from. And you distill those down to, okay, how does this now translate for the marketing organization? How does this translate for the sales organization and for the supply organization? And so basically what I have is a dashboard that I can click on net revenue, then it goes to physical and mental availability. Physical availability is basically how many points of distribution do I have and what is my SKU list for each point of distribution. Mental availability shows me by brand what is the awareness that my consumers have over my product. And then I can drill down more if I want to, but as soon as I'm there, I already know what the business is like. The one thing that is then added is from a supply or technology perspective is, what is my inventory looking like? Because that comes down then to the cash flow management. Do I have enough inventory to meet demand? Are my inventory levels too low or too high? Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing that I still have in my dashboard. Everything is automated. By the way, the entire organization has access to it. Whether you just joined yesterday and you are a line worker in our London facility, everybody can see the data all the time, because I need people to worry about the business, to think about where is my next dollar of revenue coming from. And for me, there's absolutely no secret in that dashboard. I'm willing to give it to my competitors because, again, there's nothing they can do with it because they don't have the culture and the mindset of my team to execute against those variables.
That's amazing within the organization too, because the more people that see it, they've bought into the culture and the organization, as you've described. You're going to get a whole range of different perspectives, and one person may spot an opportunity. One person may spot something that's potentially, a glitch or harmful, and getting all those different inputs. I guess that, there comes a point where that might be more difficult to manage, because right now you're only about 40 or 50 people, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, when I was the CMO in the US, I had about 350 people in my marketing organization. As long as the dashboard is simple and visible.
Right.
To be very honest, it's not too difficult to manage. The complexity comes with the way I run or try to run meetings, because I'm absolutely not perfect at it, is I don't want people to present numbers to me. The numbers are in the dashboard. You should expect that I've looked at the dashboard. I expect you to have looked at the dashboard so we know what the numbers are. I want to talk about what are the numbers saying and what are we going to do with it. And that's very difficult, because that requires discipline from your employees to actually have the time or created the time to go and look at the data and come up with conclusions or solutions to the meeting. That's very difficult, because a lot of the time we still get caught into the reporting of numbers in meetings, which I think is a giant waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the given. You're supposed to do that. Two more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Thank you for being with us tonight, everybody. So staying on the subject of IT, there's also a dynamic, you may have seen it with Anheuser-Busch or other companies. How can they do a better job of making top management aware of how it's adding value to the company or the organization?
I think IT, you can break this down in a couple of buckets. And obviously it comes down to communication, but I think you can have IT to look at cost avoidance. I mean, the fact that we're all on Zoom today, nobody needs to travel. This is perfectly doable. And so the IT department can clearly show what is the impact on cost avoidance that they've brought to the organization. The second one, which is again is also very operational, but securing the data. The fact that data that is out there does not get outside of the organization, protecting the intellectual property is value that IT brings to the table and should be shown. You see more and more breaches of databases around the world. That is a core function that the IT team needs to do, protecting the intellectual property. But then probably the most important one for me is so many people in organizations spend so much time doing simple analysis, whereas the IT department can automate all of that. And so rather than having people do the analysis, give them the analysis and let them make conclusions out of the green belt, the black belt, or whatever has been done, and use the people for what they're intended to do. And I think that's the biggest value that an IT department can bring, is either show that the time spent of the employees is more towards decision taking and moving the business, or in a reduction of FTE, because you don't need that many people doing the analysis. You just need people that take the analysis and manage the net revenue.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like you're having an awesome time in spite of COVID. I'm curious to know, given the background you came from and at Coke and Anheuser-Busch, these are big companies. They have money, they have process, they have procedure, they're big. And now you're pretty much an entrepreneur, right? A founder, albeit one with money. How do you view that? What are the pluses and minuses of that? How has that impacted you and maybe, how you're looking at things going forward?
Actually, it's fascinating, and I don't have all the conclusions yet, but I'll share a couple of observations. When I was at ABI, I always thought of myself and my teams that we were extremely entrepreneurial, fast, risk-taking, didn't take bullshit, and we just moved at the speed of light. No bureaucracy, empowerment, all of the buzzwords. Now, having kind of or sort of left ABI and leading this JV.
Questions, please.
Not yet. Hold on.
And having to interact. Well, give me 60 seconds.
That's fine.
Having now to interact with Tilray and ABI from the outside, I actually now notice that there's much more bureaucracy. The speed of decision taking is much slower than I thought it was. And so my observation is that it would be great for companies to not just pay MBAs for their talent, but let them go and lead a venture. Let them go and start up their own company and bring the mindset back to the mothership at a certain point, because I do believe that will keep and kindle the entrepreneurship in bigger organizations.
Yeah. You see a lot of that already, and certainly, we've seen it in financial institutions, some of the management consulting firms, and banks. They've set up almost as an alternative to R&D, which sort of gets bogged down in the quagmire. They've set up, innovation, think tanks, hubs, even accelerators, if you will. Yeah. And I think that's really good and really promising. I know Anheuser-Busch has done that as well. And they invest time and money and effort into nurturing these sort of these organizations within, and they learn significantly from it.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's it. Right. You've been awesome. Thank you so much. I'd like to open this up. Arwen, I assume you're still there.
Yep, I'm here.
If I've just reached out to the group. Now is a really good time for any of you to submit questions on the chat box. Arwen, if you've had a little time to go through some of them, you can read the name of the individual and ask the question to Jorn.
Sure. Yeah. First off, thank you for your insights and your sharing your experience and your journey, and I guess the beginning of it in a way. So thank you for that. So we do have a few questions. So Alpa from New York is wondering, how will ABI measure success in the near term?
You should ask ABI.
That's a good point.
But I think the answer is pretty straightforward, right? It's first and foremost is let's prove or disprove the thesis. Are cannabis beverages going to impact alcohol, yes or no? And the best way to know it is to be in there. very short term, it's very simple. Is, hey, Jorn, we give you a chunk of money. Where's my ROI? We're okay for you to lose a certain amount of money, but at some point you need to start paying the bills as well. And so they are on my ass every single time when I ask for more money to show where's my ROI? How much am I gonna get back for this? So those are the two main ones in terms of prove the thesis, but secondly, make a business that actually makes some money and repays the bills.
Excellent. I know you mentioned that you have like a diverse executive team. So one question is, how do you encourage creative thinking within your organization? I know you mentioned you guys are very entrepreneurial, but I'm assuming there may be some that maybe not as entrepreneurial or as creative thinking because everyone kind of thinks differently. How do you encourage creative thinking from your team?
Yeah, it's what we do is we encourage people to within teams, either within the marketing team or a sales team or a cross-functional team, to have at least 2 inspiring meetings every month. Mm-hmm. And so what does an inspiring meeting look like? It's go to a location that actually sparks creativity. So, for example, what we have done is we've gone to the Toronto Aquarium, we've gone to the CN Tower, we've gone to a pinball machine place, and we want to we create a theme that is reinforced by the environment, and the team spends a day there. But what I think is also very important is that it always leads to results, right? Because it's a lot of fun to go to the Toronto and talk about how you free element or how you think outside of the box. At the end of the day, there also needs to be very concrete examples on what it's going to do to impact the business, and that combination of combining the environment as a source of inspiration, but making sure that at the end of that meeting, of that day, there's business decisions, I think is very important.
Great. Is there one characteristic that you would believe every leader should possess?
Yes, empathy. And empathy, not just for people, but also for situations and problems. Because if you don't have that, you won't be able to put yourself into the position of others. You won't be able to put yourself in the position of your consumers. And if you don't do that, then obviously that's not going to work. Beyond, if you think about beyond consumer centricity, obviously ethics. I mean, I'm so disgusted by so many people, by so many leaders that are out there that are not looking at the interest of their organization and just are there to make a quick buck and do whatever it takes to make that quick buck. I think that is disgusting, and it's a disgrace to the leadership out there.
Empathy, that's an interesting word. That goes for politicians as well. No names.
We have a good question here. I imagine COVID has been a boon for cannabis. How have you pivoted to take advantage of this? Great question.
Yes, it's been a boon because, again, in Canada, it's an essential industry. Obviously, anxiety and stress are at all-time highs, and people go to cannabis to help release some of that. To be very honest, there was not a lot that we needed to do from a pivoting perspective because consumers came more to the category. The only thing that we needed to do is actually help some of our partners to think about e-commerce much more. In Canada, it's the government controls the distribution, and they're not necessarily the most savvy when it comes to e-commerce. So we gave them a book to help them make their website better, to make their route to market better. That's the only thing we had to do, and we ended up with growing our online sales dramatically versus pre-COVID. But it was more putting a little bit more accent towards e-commerce. It was not really a pivot.
Okay, great. Where do you want Fluent Beverages to be in, let's say, 1, 2, and 5 years? Do you think you'll be able to break out of Canada in that time?
Yeah, I want Fluent to be the #1 cannabis beverage company in the world. And that means that we need to make sure that we learn everything that we need to learn here in Canada. We need to make sure that we have the technology right, that we have the branding right, that we have the people right, that we have all of those strategic business elements right. And then it should be a repeatable model that we take to the rest of the world. Obviously, one of the things that needs to happen, which is out of my control, is legalization, right? So even today in the US, it's not federally legal, so we could not go to the US yet. But that wave is probably coming, because if you look at the health and wellness trend that is out there, the boom of spiked seltzer because it's perceived healthier than other alcoholic beverages. With cannabis, you have 0 calories, no hangover, no dehydration, so you have even more benefits in that health and wellness trend. So it's going to be a matter of time, and depending on legalization around the world, I want to be global and I want to be #1.
Great. Do you envision DTC via website to be temporary or permanent?
Permanent. I think anybody who starts a business today and you're not DTC first, you're an idiot.
So a follow-up to that question is, as in, will COVID create permanent changes in consumer behavior?
Absolutely, 100%. A couple of these, what is fascinating is that COVID is not distributed equally around the world. Right? You see, for example, China is already waking up post-COVID. And so looking at China about what are behavior changes that are happening over there that probably or potentially might come to the rest of the world is fascinating to look at. There's 3 that I will quickly touch upon. One, the out-of-home dinner experience reduces significantly because people have learned how to cook. And all of a sudden, in-house dining experience have become much more important because now consumers can create a unique experience at home. So for restaurants, think about that, right? They're saying that 60% of all restaurants in the US won't open up after COVID. Some people think it's an exaggerated number, but at the end of the day, if that trend of in-home entertaining and cooking is going to hold true, man, it could be 60%. Secondly, people, and that is fascinating if you combine it with the first trend, is that people do want to go to new environments, but they want to be in their bubble. And so if you look, for example, at what Airbnb has done in China specifically, is rent out houses, but as party locations. You see that happening a little bit in North America as well, but I think that evolution of massive nightclubs where 5,000 people are downscaled to smaller bubbles in private homes, I think is going to be a fascinating thing to observe as well.
Great.
Let's do one more, and then we're kind of running out of time. Go ahead, Arwen.
Sure. Actually, it's a quick one. Do you source CBD or grow and process your own?
I stole this answer from somebody else as well. But we are Heinz Ketchup. We're not a tomato farmer. Anybody can make tomatoes. Everybody can grow tomatoes, but not everybody can make Heinz Ketchup. And so that's the way we approach this business.
Great answer. Do we have one more time for one more, David?
Sure, one more.
All right, last one from Jorge. Can you talk a bit to the legal and safety governance around your CBD product?
Yeah, I mean, legal, it's very simple, right? So it's 100% legal in Canada. It's very much controlled. So Health Canada basically sets all the rules. The rules are extremely tight in terms of who can produce, who can sell, who can distribute, where you can buy. So you need to be a licensed producer. You have basically a security system all around the facility to make sure that you can track every step of the process so you don't have any loss of ingredients. Distribution is highly regulated. There's dispensaries that need to get licensed by Health Canada as well. And then consumption, it's still Health Canada. If you go to their website, they say there's no safe amount of safe consumption. But when you do, there's obviously a set of rules that they encourage you. Specifically, go low and go slow is one of the most important rules. We as Fluent, we are setting a higher standard in that regard as well. So we are very strict, no drinking and driving, no underage consumption, no overconsumption. That's all of our on our website and in our advertising code. Because we believe that we need to create the industry from the ground up, making it very safe for it to become a truly thriving industry.
I just have one more question, sort of for the universe that joined us here tonight, and thanks so much. Jorn, for any of us who have jobs in big companies, smaller companies, who've ever had the thought of going off on your own and becoming an entrepreneur or a founder, this is a loaded question, but it's a broad question. Answer it as you would. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a person thinking of embarking out on their own venture?
For me, it doesn't matter whether it's small or large. It's do what you love. I don't feel like I've worked a day in my life, and I know this is cliche, but I've always done what I loved. And what I do recommend is try to get the experience of big versus small, of international versus local, because you learn so much. But at the end of the day, if you don't love what you do, quit and do something else. And that's what it comes down to.
Well, I love what I do, so I'm staying on. Thank you so much, Jorn. On behalf of all of us at Business and Technology of Greater New York, you've been awesome. We'd like to thank all of our attendees today. We will be posting the video after this. Give us a couple of days. For all of those of you who are members of BTGNY, we'll give you access to the link. And then Jorn, thank you again, and I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
Great, you're quite
Thank you.
welcome. I'm going to cut this off now, so when I end it, I believe you will all get cut off. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you here soon at BTGNY.